The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas, critical opinions in Southeast Asia. Hi, this is Arlene and you're listening to Durian ASEAN at our Durian Heat. So we have Dr. Khoo Cheng. She's the Associate Professor of Film and Television in the University of Nottingham. She's now going to talk about food. And as we all know, among the younger generation, food porn or the culture of taking photos of food via Instagram and all that is a big thing. And of course, with Malaysians, food and the Malaysian identity is something that correlated with each other. And today we have Dr. Khoo to explain the politics of food, or in other words, how food has somehow transformed Malaysian society and the way we think. So welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Arlene. Pleased to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I'm sure you had something this morning.
Actually, no. Not so much of a breakfast person, but I am looking forward to the char kway teow after this.
So when it comes to food, why Malaysian? I mean, first of all, why Malaysians are so obsessed with food?
As a Malaysian, as a Penangite, it's hard to... Actually, of course, we are obsessed with food. It's affordable and it's affordable to eat out, and in the past we would cook it ourselves, but because we don't have time nowadays, for convenience sake we eat out, and food is plentiful and there's a lot of variety, so it's kind of natural for us to be obsessed with food. But at the same time, I would not say that we are the only ones who are obsessed with food. Other people of other nationalities would also claim that they are also crazy about food. Of course, Singaporeans and other Asians too, I would think. So
what make you want to do like in-depth research on the culture and politics of food in this country? I'm actually interested in how food brings people together, and what food means to people. And I take food because food is a very basic everyday part of our lives. So in cultural studies, which is kind of what we teach at Nottingham, we look at the culture of everyday life. And food sometimes seems so banal because you need food to sustain you, to get you going, right? You have to eat to live. But at the same time in Malaysia, we live to eat. And we live to eat.
yeah, I think most of us do. And food is very important. It's such a simple thing, but it means a lot. To be able to take that material and put it, ingest it, put it into your body. Food can nourish you, but food can also poison you. Like the granny apples.
Yeah, such a big issue now.
Yeah, so in that way, food and our relationship to food and how food forms relationships between us and among us is very important. And I wanted to look particularly in a multicultural country where we are getting more and more polarized due to religion and race. With the halalization of food, I wanted to look at how food or particular places can allow for commensality. Okay, so commensality just means people sitting around together and eating together, sharing food together. For me, that's very important because you have Muslim friends who might not feel comfortable coming to eat at your house anymore, right? They might not feel they might not feel comfortable because you cook pork in your pots and stuff like that.
They are not allowed for certain dietary or religious reasons. But food, I feel that food is such a huge thing for everyday Malaysians' life that during festival seasons, regardless whether it's Hari Raya, Deepawali, Chinese New Year and all that, I think the first thing that people would ask, like, wow, is the food. What kind of food they will be serving and all that, especially during Hari Raya and Deepawali and all that. But when it comes to Malaysian society, have they always been obsessed with food in the past compared to now?
I I'm not sure about that. I would say it also depends on how wealthy you are, right? I think that you would eat your own food because you would cook it at home. But now with Malaysians, well, not now, but from the 80s and 90s onwards, when you had the growth of a middle class that are able to afford to eat out and to eat the food of others, then you see how we become more and more obsessed with food, I would think. But in the past, if you weren't able to, if you were just sort of surviving and you didn't have much money to spend on food except on very special occasions, then you couldn't really be crazy about food. You couldn't kind of show off how open and receptive and cosmopolitan you are, right? Cosmopolitan meaning open to other people's cultures, and being able to eat different types of food.
So economic development play a crucial role in for everyday Malaysians to actually, I'm not sure the word should be celebrate, but I guess trying to embrace multiculturalism in this country. Perhaps in the past, because of certain socioeconomic condition, people were more inclined to be in their own community setting, which are mainly communal in a sense. Would that be the case?
Okay, let me qualify. Yes and no. I guess I'm thinking about the malls right now, right? The kind of mall food that you get, the kinds of international type restaurants that you have that are now open to you. So in the past, if there was intermingling among the different ethnic groups, Ali might, you might go to Ali's house to have food. And Ali might not mind coming to share, coming to your place and sharing a piece of coconut candy or peanut brittle or something like that. And so if there was intermingling within the among the ethnic groups, then there was sharing of food. But we are also insular in some ways, right? And unless you get exposed, like for example, the popularity of sushi and eating raw fish, this was not something that we did in the 60s. I mean, Japanese food was fairly elite and not many people were open to eating raw fish.
That's true.
Everything had to be cooked, and raw fish was like, ew, isn't that dangerous? But then you can see that people started to travel, they got more money, they were starting to able to afford eating Japanese food, and then they start to realize, hey, I kind of like it. And also, I guess maybe if you were conscious of status, you would eat food because that food is considered elite food, right? Or shows that you're sophisticated if you're able to appreciate raw fish, not just like cover your fish with lots of sauces like we do. Right?
We do all the time.
Yeah.
Unless you are going out for camping, then you have no choice but just to put salt, perhaps. Another area that I'm quite interested is settings, spaces where people actually eat together rather than eat separately, either within their races or just by themselves. Throughout your research, did you identify spaces or areas where people actually mingle with each other through food? Of course, I think the popular one would be the mamak stall.
Yeah.
But from your own personal research, is there anything interesting, unique coming out from that?
Yeah, I guess I use food, but actually my agenda was really kind of political, I suppose, because I wanted to go in search of places where Malaysians, Muslims and non-Muslims could come and eat together. And I was curious, at that time I was doing research on independent filmmaking in 2003, 2004, and I was looking at short films by at that time, people like Liu Seng Tak, who's just made his second film, Lelaki Harapan Dunia, was a student or had completed these student films, and they were set in the old town kind of kopitiam, not the franchised old town, but
the real deal.
The family kind of kopitiam. So I was curious about why there was this nostalgia for the kopitiam, and I think at that point that nostalgia had to do with a sense of discomfort with the present, right? We long for something that was in the past because we feel that we've lost it. and that reflects our present state of loss, that we have to go back and find something.
But what exactly is loss? Is it just the memory, or is it something more than that? Because I think food is part of the Malaysian identity in some sense, I believe. Do you think as we develop as a nation, economically as well as in terms of lifestyle, we have somehow in search of the identity that we once used to recognize closely with?
Let me kind of backtrack a bit, because in my search for kopitiams, of course, kopitiams in the past, I thought, were before people got quite obsessed and quite finicky about what is halal, what is a halal space and what isn't a halal space. They, I would argue, might have gone to kopitiams, right? You don't have to eat pork, and you can just go and have a piece of bread with a boiled egg and some kaya and a cup of coffee. So I think that back then, kopitiams, Chinese ethnic kopitiams, provided that kind of space. And
this
since
is
then,
before Mama, is it?
this is before Mama, but this is also in maybe up to the 60s, and it depends. Small towns, it kind of depends where your kopitiam is located. So if you have kind of maybe on the East Coast, and before you had maybe in a town where you didn't have a warung, you didn't have a Malay warung or a mama, then that's where everyone would go for kopi, right? So Chinese, Malay, Indians, Eurasians, everybody. But from the 70s onwards, the government was trying to encourage small Malay enterprises to come up. So they created these Medan Selera, right? These food courts to get Malay businesses to start up their own food business. So that's when you start to see the customers start to separate. So Malays want to go and frequent these places that are run by, that's right, they are run by Malays, and so they seldom then went to the Chinese one.
This was which era?
This is the post NEP, right? This is when the NEP
after 80s.
No, from 70s onwards, right? I think. But I think maybe more, it grew up more and more in the 80s.
Just to backtrack about the Chinese kopitiam, because I just want to share a story of my dad. My dad is ethnic Chinese, and his dad, which is my great grandfather, his grandfather used to open Chinese kopitiam, and what I heard in terms of the stories that he told is back in Kedah, in small town Kedah, because a lot of the warung are located in kampongs, since majority of Malays are not living in the urban or in the town, so the kopitiam became the central meeting point between all races. Exactly. And what's irony is the kopitiam in the past, people don't see it whether they serve halal or not. It's somehow it's like those kind of unwritten rule that you don't really serve pork to your Muslim customer. Right. And it's also an unwritten rule for the Muslim customer to enjoy their food in Chinese kopitiam, because they know that they won't be purposely serving pork to them. Right. But I think throughout the years, these unwritten rules between different races have somehow loosened out, meaning that people just become so distrust towards other races that they would need to remind that, please don't serve me pork. Right. But in the past, it wouldn't be like that. Yeah.
I actually don't think that it is something that's only in the past. I think that those unwritten rules are still there because we've lived in a multicultural society for so long. It's just that now the sense of governing oneself, right, knowing what one's boundaries are, have been subcontracted out, if you like, to Jakim. Right, and to the state, and the state governs. The state deals out what are Muslim laws and how Muslims should control themselves. Right, should take. So because of that, I think that Muslims or it is Muslim subjects are seen as people who no longer have a mind of their own, and they have to be told what to do. So
unfortunately,
yeah, and as a Muslim person, you relegate that self-autonomy by, if the first question that you ask is that place halal or not? So it has to you have to rely on the stamp of approval from the state. You know, it's not your own ability to judge whether you are doing the right thing or not. Because in Islam, and not that I'm a big authority, but I've read a bit, that you have to govern. Islam is also about, not just about your personal relationship with God, but it's also a triangular one, right? The society, the individual's relationship with society. And so you have to kind of juggle these three things: your relationship with God and your relationship with society. So if you are going out with non-Muslim friends, non-Muslim friends would already have in mind that you cannot eat certain things, but at the same time, you also have to not keep imposing your, these rules, in order to not offend your non-Muslim friends. Right. So there's, in my book, and this is not my theory. This is another theorist who talks about how Malays become hosts, right, during Hari Raya. But then Malay friends are less likely to come to Chinese New Year and eat open house anymore. In the past they did, but now, because of the halalization and this sense of controlling yourself, this fear of being contaminated, they are less likely to come. So in that sense, Chinese Malaysians are not able to play host, right? So the host and the guest relationship is always governed by the generosity of the host, and in that way the power of the host to host.
But would it be just...
wait, let me just finish. So this inability of the non-Muslim to host, like to properly host the Muslim, means that they are always placed in the position of the guest, right? The pendatang in the country, in other words. And I think that really explains how food is part of this deal, right? that food is supposed to bring people together, but there are certain structures in place that doesn't allow people to come together. And that it depends on what kinds of food.
Interesting that you bring upon the example of Malay and Chinese, but why when it comes to Malay and other non-Muslim Bumiputras, that kind of tension relationship doesn't really occur that much? For example, in Sabah, Sarawak, or among the orang asli Malaysian, the orang asli in the West Peninsula and the Malays, is it because of religion, or is it more than just religion? Because I still remember growing up in Gombak, I used to have friends from the orang asli community. They seem to mingle well with the Malay community. In fact, they adopted Malay culture and all that, but they still maintain their animistic religion. So how would you describe, the relationship of other races other than the Chinese and Malay?
It's complicated, right? I mean, there's a kind of hierarchy, and it's complicated by questions of economic status, by history, the history of who came when. It's complicated. So it's not easy to just say it's one thing or the other, because of course you also had, if you go deep enough, if you look at Peranakan Chinese identity, in the past there was some intermarriage. There had to be some kind of intermarriage, when the Chinese men came and they weren't allowed to bring Chinese women. They would have married local women, right? I'm not sure if the local women were Muslim or not. Some people say they weren't. Some people say they were Bataks. So it's much more complicated than just religion. Yeah.
So we'll take another short break. When we return, we will discuss more with Dr. Gaik Cheng Khoo.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas, critical opinions,
in Southeast Asia. Hey, this is Arlene, and we are back again with Dr. Gaik Khoo, and she is the Associate Professor of Film and Television in the University of Nottingham under the School of Modern Languages and Culture. So just now, earlier, we just ramble a lot about food and how it affects our culture and politics. Nowadays, as I think I mentioned earlier about how youngsters today, they appreciate food through social media like Instagram and all that. And nowadays there's this term called food porn, where you will see pictures and pictures of people posting the food that they eat, the restaurants that they went, and becomes such a huge subculture among the younger generation that it took a life on its own, it seems like. But how do you relate with the culture of the younger generation today in their interaction with food, with the larger picture of social politics, I would suppose?
I'm not sure about social politics. I think it's more like social media.
Social media.
Really, I mean, if you look at reviewers, experienced food reviewers in major newspapers like the New York Times or LA Times, the Malaysian young foodies, they don't really describe the food in complex ways. They take beautiful pictures, but it's kind of superficial. I think, and I think it's because it's easy because of the digital technology that you're able to do all that, and it frees up, it democratizes this avenue of food reviewing, right? And anyone can be a photographer now, it would seem. But I think people have to play catch up in terms of writing very discriminatory, very concise and very beautiful reviews. The way you describe the food, I think that our ability to take pictures and our visual sense exceeds our linguistic sense, our linguistic skills, and that's part of the problem of younger people, because sometimes you just go and there would just be pictures with very few text. They would say, oh, and this was good, and this is why I ate, and this is why I ate, and this is why I ate, and then maybe a rating. The more experienced ones, they would actually describe the food in more detail. So people talk about texture, they talk about taste, but
not really deep enough in terms of appreciating food, I suppose.
It's not that Malaysians don't appreciate food. I think they do. I mean, that's why there are all these pictures, right? And I think also that these pictures, whatnot, are very much a symptom of middle-class Malaysians who have a car, are able to get out to these places to take these pictures, right? Because if you don't have a car, and you don't have now these mobile phones are quite cheap, and these smartphones are quite cheap, but it's not easy to do that.
That's true. From the culture of the younger generation, do you see like people are getting more communal or more together? Because you did mention in your upcoming book, which is the book which you mentioned about together in difference, eating together in difference. What does that really mean?
Eating together in difference actually comes from a theorist named Ian Ang, who's based in Australia. Ian Ang is her history is very interesting because she's actually ethnic Chinese who grew up in Indonesia, but then because of the kind of anti-Chinese sentiment, was sent to study in the Netherlands, and then ended up teaching in Australia many years later, migrating there. So she's talking about together in difference, how in and she's talking about the multicultural experience in Australia, about how Australian multiculturalism, how can people kind of really be together in their difference. So you have to be united, but you have to be, we always seem to think that unity means that we all have to be the same.
So there's no such thing as assimilation in terms of just to be united, but not necessarily the same.
Wait, let me finish. So unity kind of is based on this assumption that you're all going to be the same. But so she's saying that you have to be together in difference. So she's saying that we are multicultural and you have to accept our difference, and our difference we can still be together, but you know, premised on our difference. Right? So in Malaysia we have this multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is kind of built into our constitution, and what Jean Deru and I, my co-author, what we're trying to do is to talk about how we can eat together as people who are of different ethnic backgrounds.
Interesting. And because of that, why Malaysians are still, you know, talking about national unity, and you know, why we are so polarized, especially nowadays. A lot of people are getting so concerned with the state of religion and race relation. Has the concept of eating together in differences you know, disappear or getting lesser and lesser prominence in our daily lives?
I think we can still eat together in difference, except that space that allows us to eat together in difference is a halal space. You know?
Okay, that's interesting.
Right? So that halal space, if your Papa Rich is halal, then it allows us to eat together in difference. Your mamak stall is halal because it's run by Tamil Muslims, who, you know, so they are Muslims, and therefore it's halal. And
so the space must be halal.
I think so.
Yeah. In the past, the space doesn't necessarily have to be halal. Like, they can pick and choose which one that they think is halal. They can eat in any spaces in the past.
If you ask Malays today, yes, the space has to be halal.
But do you think this is healthy? I mean, in terms of race relation in the future or for now?
I think that in today's climate, where we are getting where you know, in a semi-authoritarian state that is tied up, where our identities are very much tied up, ethnicity and religion are, you know, intertwined together. It's very difficult for people who are progressive to think outside of the box and to take back that power to decide for yourselves as we as rational beings, right? We look outward to other things to tell us what to do, whether it's the state, the government, whether it's a religious leader, or, you know, a religion or philosophy or whatever. So in that way we give up some sense of our autonomy in that way. And when we do that, we have to again think about our relationship with other people around us.
So when it comes to the Muslim community in this country, I guess I'm referring to the Malay Muslim. Is it just them, or is it Muslims in general globally that they have this idea that you need to be very, very conscious of not just your food, but the space where you have your food?
I would not generalize in that way. I wouldn't say that, you know, all Malay Muslims in Malaysia are like that, or all globally people are not like that. It is much more complicated, right? It depends on the kind of Islam that has filtered into Malaysia through Saudi Arabia. So it's that kind of doctrinal type of Islam. Not all Malay Muslims abide by this too, right? There are people who are rational and think about what they do, which doesn't impact their relationship with God.
Besides religion, how does the nuances in our daily lives, either in politics or in culture, impact the way we view food, or our habits towards food?
I think that our habits towards food is very different to our habits towards the people who are making that food, or the people whose this food originated from, right? And this is the irony, right? So here we are as Malaysians embracing nasi lemak, or embracing mamak mi, or rojak, or pasembur, or mamak food. But then when something happens, something political happens, then the people, people in the opposition, or who support the opposition, will turn against mamaks, right? Indian Muslims, or actually Tamil Muslims, in the sense that they are all pro-UMNO. And then they start saying, oh, we should maybe boycott their businesses. So again, this is very ironic, right? You eat their food.
They're the only safe space for all races, it seems like.
Yeah, and then at the same time you say, I don't like you because I don't like your politics. But then of course not all Indian Muslims not all Tamil Muslims are like that, right? So I think those are the things that I want to bring up. I think in our book we point out that the food that have become national, that every Malaysian has adopted as Malaysian, are actually made by migrants. You know, if you look at the Indian Rojak, for example, right? You won't find mamak mi or Indian Rojak or nasi kandar
probably anywhere else, even in India probably.
Right.
That goes back to my personal idea about Malaysian society. We like to take other people's food and actually either reinvent it or make it fusion with the local flavors and make it our own. And because of that, sometimes we have tensions with our neighbors when we want to claim certain food as in being part of our nation, when the neighbors would say that, hey, but it's originated from our land, not yours. I mean, I give example of what I can think of is rendang. A lot of the people, the Indonesian from Sumatra would claim that rendang originated from Sumatra, not from Malaysia. But rendang is so intertwined with the Malaysian culture that it's hard to, even with peranakan as well, it's hard to not say rendang is not part of the Malaysian food.
Well, rendang I think does come from Sumatra. I mean, let's not forget that this whole archipelago, this is Durian ASEAN after all, this whole region before nationalism emerged, right? People just travel all over the place. My maternal grandfather, I've heard, was a rice merchant in Indonesia. So people move back and forth, and these boundaries are artificially created, right? They are constructed at a particular time in history. So that doesn't wipe out or erase the shared history and the fact that people were migrating, way, way before globalization in the 20th century. So I'm not a big quibbler of, this is mine and that is yours, and, because I think we have to bear in mind that we share these histories. So
Hainanese chicken is not either Singapore or Malaysia?
Well, I'm not sure if you get it in Hainan. I'm not sure if there are any changes.
But that's the funny thing, when you ask hawkers or even ordinary Malaysians, where does char kway teow come from, where does nasi lemak come from, it's really hard to pinpoint one destination, because even some food are invented in this country. I mean, the best example is bak kut teh and Hokkien noodle, the KL version. It's totally invented locally that you cannot find anywhere in China. So how do you actually explain all those food?
But you see, this is the wonderful thing about Malaysia and Singapore, is that you have a land of mostly migrants who've had to think on their feet and invent on their feet. Right? You come here, you find whatever ingredients you can, and you just do the best you can with what you have. And sometimes you get really wonderful, delicious things.
Food that sounds like Hokkien noodle, but it's not from Hokkien. Just like mee bandung, a lot of Malaysian would consume. Maybe it comes from Bandung, but when you ask an Indonesian from Bandung is like, we never heard of that before. What are you talking about? So even food that has a name that comes from another country or another place actually is not even from that place.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that, you know, when you have like if you go to Canada and you ask for Singapore noodles, it's actually fried beehoon with kunyit, you know, with turmeric. Yeah, and you're like, oh, never get this before in Singapore, right? So it's really about inventing something, an idea of Singapore that Canadians might have. I don't know.
It's funny that you mentioned about, you know, how other countries have re-adopted, you know, food from this region, because even if you go to our neighboring countries, for example, Myanmar, sometimes you would see in their menu Malaysian noodles, but it tastes totally different. But it also shows that how migrant workers from Myanmar, when they come back to their own country, they actually brought back the Malaysian culture, or at least the flavors of Malaysian to their own country. Yeah. Which is, I think is beautiful in a way. Yeah,
I mean, in that way, I think food is, like culture, is constantly evolving, right? And the char kway teow from one stall to another, you might have the basic ingredients, but they might not taste the same. I mean, a mother's char kway teow, and then when the son fries the char kway teow at the same stall, would taste different. Right? So we shouldn't just blame migrant workers for not being able to cook, you know, good char kway teow or whatever Penang hawker food we're talking about here. It really depends on whether you have the skill and the talent, I think.
Good that you mentioned about Penang government and how it handles food. But in essence, do you think government should dictate how food should be cooked or how food should be produced to society?
I think governments get into the game when it's tied to the economy, particularly the tourist economy, which is very ironic because it's, you know, there's two kinds of discourse that are coming together. One is about cultural preservation, right? This hawker food is an intangible cultural heritage. It is ours, and therefore we have to look after it. We have to preserve it. And the other one is tourism. But if you go around and you actually interview the hawkers, they are catering to locals, you know, because they can't depend on the tourists who come maybe seasonal and whatnot, you know. They really can't rely on those. So they have to please the local customers first of all. But it's a complicated manner. I don't think that the state should be in the business of dictating those kinds of things. But at the same time, what the state is trying to do is to stop change from happening, and change is inevitable.
Especially on things as simple as food. Yeah, it's keep on changing in a way. I mean, I just give an example of nasi lemak. Probably 100 years ago, nasi lemak is just sambal and peanuts. But now you have like a whole array of like side dishes to choose from.
Yeah, and that cannot be helped because in the past we didn't have that much money. You know, in the past, 50 cents for a nasi lemak bungkus is already a lot of money. You know, 30 cents maybe, right, for just your plain nasi lemak, and then a teaspoon of sambal belacan, and then maybe one piece of cucumber or a teaspoon of ikan bilis, and that was it, right? But because as Malaysians are getting more and more affluent, well, in the 90s and maybe a decade ago, I don't know about today, then you feel like, oh, we have to give you more, you know. Yeah, throw in the fried chicken, throw in this, throw in that, and suddenly you're like, what? 7 ringgit?
That's true. Now we have like 10 ringgit nasi lemak. In the past, it used to be just 50 cents for that small.
And that's why we're getting more and more obese, right? Because we just want more and more and more. And in the beginning, in the past, it was just about that little snack that you have just to get your morning started.
Talking about
now it's a full brunch.
Now it's a full brunch, and that's why we are the most obese nation in Southeast Asia. Right. We'll take a second break. When we return, we will discuss more with Dr. Khoo Cheng.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas, critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene, and we are back again with Dr. Khoo Gaik Cheng. She is the Associate Professor of Film and Television, based in University of Nottingham, Malaysian campus, in the School of Modern Languages and Cultures. So we talk a lot about food, too much actually. But growing up, just to know about your personal life, growing up, were you exposed with a lot of different food in Malaysia, or were you only exposed with like certain race only?
I grew up in Penang, so as a Chinese Malaysian, you mostly ate, the food at home. My parents on both sides are Peranakan Chinese, but we also had Pama, Jumpama, who was our maid, and she cooked Indian curries. So there's kind of a dish that I cannot make, but which always brings back memories of Pama, and that's a fish curry that you have, when you go and get a roti canai. That sort of nice tangy sourness to it with the mustard seeds. And she would make that. And then whenever she had a bit of money, she would make maybe like a crab curry. And my little sister, we would pester her and we would eat with our hands, fingers, and have her food. So in that way, we had some exposure to non-Chinese and non-Peranakan food, at home itself. We also had, my little sister had a nanny who was Malay, Sham. So we had a bit of Malay food, and during Hari Raya we would go to Sham's sister's house, and also Abdul's house. Abdul was the gardener, who also worked for my dad's company, and my dad had got him to be the gardener as well as the driver, i.e. taking us home from school. So we had a bit of exposure to just other people's food. Plus, of course, we had food outside, in the nasi, all kinds of hawker food, and
so I guess Penang is probably a unique state in a way that you can easily sample other people's food just by going out to the nearest shop and all that.
Yeah.
But what about like other states in this country? I mean, I just give example. Let's say in the East Coast, Kelantan and Terengganu, where they have 99% of one particular race. Like, what is the race relation in those majority race states where it's very hard for you to even like see anyone from other minority groups? How do people actually interact, and how they use food for that interaction?
I don't think it's that bad in Kelantan. I mean, some years ago I was traveling in Kelantan and Terengganu and we'd go to a Chinese kopitiam, and there in the Chinese kopitiam you'd have some Malay stall sellers, or maybe I can't remember whether it was a Chinese kopitiam or a Malay-run coffee shop where there were Chinese stalls, and they have very good relations. We asked the Chinese noodle seller, and she said that we have very good relations. So I think that people in the center seem to think that the ethnic minorities have the short end of the stick in places like Kelantan, but that I don't think it's true. Yeah.
So are you saying also like a lot of this conflict with food when it comes to religion and race mainly is a middle class or urban centric sort of problem, not so much of a rural problem?
I wouldn't say that. Again, I would not make any generalizations that have to do with class and urban/rural, because that urban/rural thing, people go back and forth, right? You might be raised in Kedah or in Kelantan or Temerloh or whatever, and then you come to work in the city, and so people go back and forth. So it's hard to say. I wouldn't even say it was conflict, because it's not a major thing. It's not a big thing. It doesn't mean that we cannot sit down. I think it's because we live in a culture where there's a lot of give and take, and compromise on the part of ethnic minorities who have grown up here and are used to that kind of negotiation, right? And also on the part of majority Malays too, depending on their backgrounds and where they grow up with, who their friends are, and all of that. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that it was open conflict. I would say that I think the book points out that these negotiations and that sense of inequality around power and being able to feed other people, that sense of reciprocity is there, and it has to do with a sense of hurt, you know. But it's not like I'm going to fight you or, you know, all of that. It's this sense of hurt that I cannot reciprocate. You know, I cannot. You have been very generous to me, but I cannot host you. So, for example, now I'm interviewing Koreans living in Malaysia and seeing whether they do actually have a multicultural experience or not with other Malaysians. And some of them, at least one person said yes, he has Malays and Chinese and Indian friends, but they don't. And Malay friends would say come for Hari Raya, so the whole family would go, but they would not come to a Korean household to eat because, you know, Koreans also eat pork. And then another one said that her friend would then say, let's go and meet, and they'll go and eat at a vegetarian restaurant or a halal place, right? So you compromise in that you go to a space that is halal, or that you know for sure will not somehow make you feel uncomfortable. Yeah.
From your research, what do you see the future of this country when it comes to race relation and all that, especially concerning food? Like, do you think food is the only solution to address whatever racial problem that we have, especially on the grassroots level?
Food is and is not. The thing, food is just a symptom. I mean, I use food as a way in to have this discussion about how we can be together, you know, and how we can be together is structured, is organized by much larger structures in place, right? In terms of the way our economy is managed, the way race relations is managed by the state and by people who are in power. I would say that in the grassroots, relations are still good, but sometimes you would not think that is the case if we actually read all the headlines in the news.
Or maybe the media is fooling us.
Yeah, but the other thing too that we have to be, you know, that is quite upsetting is that over the years there have been policies put into place and a kind of slow encroachment of a religialization of, that's not a word, but, you know, a kind of increasing encroachment of religion into politics, and that messes things up. I think it cannot help but,
and because of that,
interfere with
the idea
unity.
The idea of halalness become a central compromise among different races in this country.
Yeah, it becomes a compromise. Yeah. So when we wrote the book, and the book took about 9 years to put together because the articles were written at different times, I started out being very idealistic. By the time I get to the final chapter, which was written just last year, I was very down. I was quite depressed. Yeah.
What was your hypothesis when you started out?
I guess my hypothesis is that food can save us, and my co-author Jean believes that we have to look at this micro politics, right? And that food can bring people together, and food has a lot of significance, and it's the kind of symbolic value we place in food, whether to keep others out, or to be inclusive, to include other people, or to be exclusive, to exclude other people. But when but Jean's not in this country, Jean's in Australia, and when you're here and you're reading all these headlines, it doesn't sound good. Race relations doesn't sound all that hunky-dory anymore. But I guess what the book hopes is to bring awareness about the significance of food and how food is supposed to bring people together, and so that we become much more thoughtful when we think about our food, and when we think about eating together and the possibilities of eating together.
So you can have your halal food and non-halal food together in one table. Would that be possible in the coming future for Malaysians?
It is still possible. It's just that other people don't seem to think that it is a possibility.
Yeah, maybe our ancestor can show the way. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on the show.